What if I told you I use the same rubric to assess everything?
You're listening to That Music Podcast with Bryson Tarbett, the curriculum designer and educational consultant behind That Music Teacher and the Elementary Music Summit. Each week, Bryson and his guests will dive into the reality of being an elementary music teacher and how music can truly be transformative in the lives of the students you serve. Show notes and resources mentioned in this episode can be found at thatmusicteacher.com.
Welcome back to That Music Podcast. Today, we are going to dive into a way that I simplified assessment by using more or less one rubric. And I want to first off by saying I kind of learned bits and pieces of this, through my different field placements here in Ohio. So this is by no means a Bryson original, but I really used it in my classroom to simplify assessment so much, because when we get to it, assessment is about figuring out if our students are understanding what's going on, and if they're ready for more, if they need more assistance and things like that. So really what we're looking for in an assessment is to figure out what our student learning is, our student achievement, and their understanding of the concept that we're placing in front of them. So sometimes we like to really make this complicated. And I think a lot of this comes from No Child Left Behind and all the pretty data and, putting glitter on data and using data for the sake of data, even when we don't have time to look at the data. Which is why I think data gets a bad rap, because when it really comes down to it, data-based curriculum and assessment-based data is really where it comes down to whether or not we as teachers should move on to a new concept or continue to explore the concept that we're on in different ways. So when you're truly having data-driven instruction, I know that's kind of a buzzword that gets thrown around, but it actually is really helpful. And I think it doesn't need to be as complicated as sometimes we think it is, or sometimes our administrators think it is, which is why I'm going to tell you today about the 4-point rubric that I use for everything. Before I dive into what those 4 points are, I want to talk about why I choose to use one rubric rather than having rubrics for recorders or rubric for this and then that and the other thing. And the issue, or the main point, is simplicity. We have how many standards as music teachers between all the different grades? A bunch, right? So if we were going to create rubrics for every single one of those standards, not only would that just take a lot of time, but every time when we do the assessment, we're having to relearn this rubric, and it's going to take us longer and longer to actually do the actual assessment. Which, let's be honest, if it's going to take us a lot of time, we're probably going to do it less. So by using a 4-point rubric that's pretty similar, no matter what the concept is we're assessing, we're able to assess more often because it's simpler. So here's what my 4-point rubric is. So whether we're doing a singing voice assessment or understanding a rhythm, I'm going to use the same 4-point rubric. So whether I'm doing singing voice or trying to figure out if a student has rhythmic understanding for a new concept, I'm going to be using the same 4-point rubric. So a level 4 is the highest you can be. And a 4 is that you are able to demonstrate mastery of the concept without teacher support. So if it was singing voice, you are able to match pitch, you're able to use your head voice, and you're able to sing without any teacher support. That's a 4. A 3 would be you're able to show mastery of the concept with teacher support. So if you're not able to match pitch on your own, but if I sing it and you echo it back and you're able to do it, that would be a 3 in this concept. A 2 is you're progressing towards mastery. So you're working on it. You're getting a little better. Maybe in this case, it might be maybe they're in head voice, but they're not quite matching. And then a number 1, it was they're not showing any mastery of the concept. So basically, there's still a lot of work to be done. So I use that for everything. And you can use that in a lot of different ways. First of all, I love that there's no middle ground. So you can't say they're just in the middle. They're either, getting it or they're not. Also, you can make this a little bit more complicated if you need to. So for instance, if I was wanting to do, make my singing voice a little bit more specific, I could have 1 through 4 for pitch matching, 1 through 4 through head voice, 1 through 4 through, technique or whatever. You could make that more complicated, but by having the same criteria, the same four levels, it's going to make the assessment so much faster and so much easier. So I'm fully aware that there are probably some of you that feel a little uncomfortable with how simple these rubrics are. And I'm also aware that there are probably some administrators that will not like this system. What I say to that is this. Again, simplicity makes it easier to do, which means you're going to do it more often, which means you're going to get more meaningful data points rather than just a couple big assessments throughout the quarter. You're going to be able to see that growth, show that growth, and chart that growth. Additionally, it's like I said, you can make it more complicated by having multiple domains on that 4-point scale, but you don't need to. Like, for instance, if you want to know if a student is able um, to tongue in the recorder, that's going to be a simple thing. Can they do it? Can they not? So that would be a 4-point rubric. If you are wanting to know, can a student play a recorder with good technique, that's going to be a little bit more complicated. That's going to be, maybe you have the tonguing, maybe you have the overblowing, things like that. So it really comes down to, what actually are you assessing? Are you assessing a larger concept, or are you assessing something that's a little bit more granular, like tonguing on a recorder, or building a ta or a TT rather than clapping one? So you can assign your assessments in different ways, or you can design, your assessments in different ways to make them a little bit easier to go with this 4-point scale. And again, I think that allows us to really get to the core of the concept that we're teaching. Because let's be honest, you would not use a 4-point rubric to see, does a student understand what a quarter note is? Because that is so nebulous and vague, and there are so many different aspects. Can they read it? Can they write it? Can they clap it? Can they build it? Different things like that. So obviously there's different parts of assessment within each standard. And if you have administrators who are like, oh, I don't really like this, or like, hey, well, that's not a rubric, you need a rubric for everything. My challenge for them is this: when we are able to do more assessment, like I said, more often, and then write it down, because let's be honest, music teachers, we are the worst at writing down our assessments. We're constantly doing informal assessment. We're just terrible at writing it down. If we write it down, we're going to have more data to use. So my challenge for you is this: do it this way and show your administrator the data that you have. If they start pushing back, say, hey, I saw that this student was able to match pitch on this for this day, but then they started being able to do it with my assistants. And then now look, they're able to do it without my assistants, and kind of use that as proof of, hey, this is working. It might not look what it looks like in another classroom, but this is working for me and the students, and the number of students, and the wide concepts that we teach in the music classroom. So I know this isn't going to be for everyone. I know not every administrator is going to let this fly, unfortunately, but I really think that simplifying a rubric to something like this makes it so that you can use it more often. You can use it between different grades, and you don't have to memorize or even have a physical rubric with you. You can just write a number down as you're doing assessment, rather than having to print out, 40, 700, whatever, different physical rubrics. You can actually do it more just kind of writing it in your gradebook. So I hope this episode got you thinking a little bit differently about how we do assessment, how we write down assessment, and how we use rubrics in the classroom. Because I think that so often data gets a bad rap, because we have administrators who are told by their superiors that we need data, and we need to show data, no child left behind, data, all these things, right? But the reality is, data is a good thing. Having high quality student data is really important to allow us as teachers to know what we need more of, what we need less of, and where we are to go from here. It's kind of like when you have a GPS, right? What I love about GPSs is it's not like a map where if you make a wrong turn, you have to go figure out how to get back to where the map is. But a GPS, if you take a wrong turn, you'll get a constant, it'll recalculate, right? It'll say, hey, something is a little bit off here. And you're able to recalculate from that. And that is exactly what using high quality data and having a lot of data and then writing it down and analyzing it can do for us as teachers. It can help us recalculate to get us back on path to a curriculum and to our high student learning. With that being said, thank you so much for listening to this episode of That Music Podcast. If you have any questions or comments, please send us an email, hello@thatmusicteacher.com. We would love to support you in any way that we can. And if you haven't already subscribed to this podcast, go ahead and hit that little follow button on iTunes and leave us a review. That would make us so happy. We read every single one of them. And in case nobody has told you lately, thank you so much for making a difference in the lives of the students that you teach.